tourism's one of the least resilient industries to the impacts of climate change. It's also about how the industry future-proofs itself. Getting deeper and deeper into the topic, you realise how important the community angle is. That covers both social and economic, because it's all about how you're creating resilient communities who aren't having their cultures and communities destroyed by huge influxes of tourists.
Welcome back to the 10 Adventures podcast. Today we're talking about sustainability and travel. And sustainability is not just the environmental factors of our trip, but also the impact of the places we are visiting. Here to guide us through this complex topic is Rebecca Thompson, winner of the People Environment Achievement Award for Travel, and also the founder of Sustainable Travel Technologies, a certified B Corp that is working to solve the challenges of tourism's sustainability leaders. Hi, Rebecca. Welcome to the show.
Hi, thanks so much for having me on here.
I'm excited to talk about this because my journey for sustainability has definitely evolved. I originally thought this was just about, okay, what are my carbon emissions? But there's actually a lot more. And when you look at this, it just becomes so complex. There's so much information, and I hear people just say they give up. I don't know what to do, so I'll do nothing. And so maybe before we start going into detail, can you maybe step back and just share what your framework is in looking at sustainability specifically in travel?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that can be a real challenge, how we bring travelers on the journey with us in the tourism industry when it comes to sustainability. So for me, sustainability more than anything is about how we, as travelers, minimize the negative impacts that we're having in destination as tourists. So it absolutely is environmental, but it's also looking at the kind of social impacts on the communities in destination, on the economy. As for lots of these places, it can be a really big economic factor for how the local region operates. If they're heavily dependent on tourism, that can have a really big impact. So, some of these things are a bit bigger than just individual travelers, but it's really important when we look at sustainability in tourism. I'd say from my side, it is something I was really approaching from the environmental angle when I first came to the challenge. And just getting deeper and deeper into the topic, you realise how important the community angle is. And that covers both social and economic, because it's all about how you're creating resilient communities who aren't having their cultures and communities destroyed by huge influxes of tourists. But also that their livelihoods are resilient. But for me, I'd say, the climate side is still a really important aspect. Tourism's one of the least resilient industries to the impacts of climate change. Just if you look at how, destinations essentially are going to be so damaged and affected by the impact. It's also about how the industry future-proofs itself. To be able to continue to provide, amazing travel experiences going forward.
Yeah, when I look at sustainability, I always think, can my travel benefit the places I'm going? So not only not do harm, but can it actually help regular people? And the truth is, right now, in a lot of travel, it's not helping the regular person. And I wonder, when you look at sustainability in tourism, what are the biggest challenges that tourism as a whole is facing regards to sustainability?
Yeah, of course. I mean, what I actually love about what you mentioned there is this other piece, like how do we as an industry or as travelers do good? And that's touching on probably a bit of a buzzword, but regenerative tourism as well, and how we can really have a positive impact through travel. But yeah, in terms of challenges, I would say climate impact, carbon emissions is one of the significant ones. We're looking at, say, I think it's 8 to 11% of global emissions are from tourism. And as I mentioned there, it's not just about the human impact of that, the environmental impact of that, but also for kind of travelers caring about wanting to be able to go to these places. You're seeing more and more commonplace the kind of weather disasters and, wildfires. You can't go to these places if they're, recovering from crises like that. But there's a broader question and challenge here. Mass tourism is a really big problem, and how certain destinations have become just like huge hotspots. And you're seeing growing protests happening from local people around that. And, it's really important to understand what's driving that in different places and what can really be done to solve it.
It's interesting you mentioned mass tourism, and my parents like to go on cruises, and so we have family reunions on cruises. And I remember I was researching the first one I did, and I found out like in some destinations, like the local community doesn't really get anything. The port is a privately owned enterprise. People come in, they bus in tour guides, and essentially people come and overrun the city and they leave. But the locals, they sell some souvenirs. And I really start to notice how tourism is impacting communities. And we're actually seeing some pushback. In the news, we see in Spain, there's a big pushback against tourism. Now, it's not everywhere. There's lots of places in Spain that love having tourism. Typically, it's the smaller, less visited places where they can really connect with tourists and see them not as someone driving rents up or, causing issues, but they really recognize they can see the jobs that are being provided. But also, I was reading recently about how a village in Greenland, actually, locals were going out in their boats to prevent cruise ships from docking in their port because they just weren't seeing any benefit to their community. And, what are you seeing in terms of this backlash to tourism? And like, what do you think the future is going to hold? These are a few isolated cases right now.
Yeah, I think, you kind of touched on it there. There's a really kind of, I guess, inequality in how different locations are experiencing tourism. And you really are seeing certain destinations struggling so hard in terms of, the pressure on their resources. Barcelona's a really good example. I think maybe I'm going to get the numbers wrong here, but in terms of your ratio of, local population to tourists each year, it's insane. So, multiples of tourists compared to the number of people that actually live there. And when you are seeing these kind of protests and resistance in local areas, it is really important to listen to exactly what the complaints are, I suppose, because it can be smaller groups, but they're raising particular issues. So in Barcelona, it feels like it's really driven by how tourism is affecting rent prices and the housing market. And it will be it's other things, there's just the volume of people there. It's really the pressure on resources as well. So it's a hot country, so how that affects the water table, just to have that influx of people and, the pressure on water or, other resources there. The was it Iceland or Greenland case that you mentioned? I think
Greenland,
Greenland.
yeah.
Greenland case.
Elucidate, I think it's called.
Mm.
Illulisat, I think. I can't say it.
But yeah, no, this is a particular, it's, one particular place. And I think it's a real hotspot for travelers because it's where you're, I think, seeing icebergs.
Yeah.
And this, I think, has really been a spot for a long time to go and do that. But there are lots of local tour operators that have often been the ones taking people out on these tours. And now you've got these big cruises undercutting the local tour operators. And that's what was really driving, I think, the complaints there. So it is about understanding what the real challenges are for these regions and localities, and how you, as an industry, say as the tourism industry or as the traveller, listen to how the locals really want to welcome you to their home, and how you kind of be a better traveler?
One issue is the impact of vacation rentals. So I actually love staying in hotels when my wife and I travel. Like, I just love having your hotel room cleaned and all those little things. But with a family, it's really hard. A lot of places, they don't even have rooms for five. And so I love using vacation rentals, but I'm also conscious of the impact it has. And you see it in big cities where they see rents going up because you can make 2, 3, 4 times more money as a vacation rental versus just renting to a regular person. But I especially hear stories in remote places. And so 10 Adventures does hiking and cycling tours in 85 countries. And a lot of those tours are based in remote mountain towns. And you just hear about all the staff housing. Sometimes it's old camping trailers or, old apartments that had been used to house all the staff. Those are now being converted to Airbnbs or VRBOs. And like, what do you see as a solution for this? That there's demand for these vacation rentals, but it really, all the impact is on the people who are living in the location. Often it's even external investors. I have a friend that runs a cleaning company that globally services Airbnbs, and they have customers who have 100 Airbnbs all over the world.
It's
And
crazy.
it's a portfolio of assets for them, but none of that money stays locally. It all leaves. And like, is there a solution for this?
Yeah, I mean, it's a really challenging issue. You're definitely seeing in cities more policies popping up really to try and control this. So at least, in certain places, I think New York, other cities where you have to, as a minimum, have registered as a sort of short-term holiday let to be able to list on say Airbnb. And that at least allows them to manage the stock a bit better, understand what the challenge is, and it helps with transparency maybe, but I think there are also limits on how many people can register and all that kind of stuff, and maybe hopefully also on what they're allowed to charge. I think that's what's got to happen here. There's got to be a control on prices, I suppose, but it's a broader challenge. So, I mean, you've always seen this happen when there's cool areas or, somewhere arty, creative, that's got a really vibrant community. People want to go there. And, maybe that used to be more a case of people wanting to move there, and that pushed up prices, and then it pushed out the communities. And obviously that's like the gentrification challenge. But this short-term let thing just accelerates that process hugely and prices people out so quickly. So it's right that people should be protesting this and asking for change. It's maybe not like a clear answer how to solve this, but one thing really is, and obviously the case of Spain that you mentioned is quite an interesting case because they have real hotspots in Spain that people really focus on traveling to, like Barcelona or say Marbella. There's particular places that all the tourists seem to go to. France, just above, they have a real culture of protest that you don't see big anti-tourist protests there. And I think that's because they have a better distribution of where tourists go. You don't get this big concentration. And maybe that's just a bit of an evolution of how their tourism industry kind of took off, or they just have lots more little tourist spots for people to go to, and it's more spread out. So that's something as well. How do you better cater to the tourist industry that you want and get people to go to, maybe in the case of Spain, it's getting them into more remote locations. But obviously you talked about remote places that are having real challenges with this, and anywhere that becomes a kind of go-to destination for people will see this happen and see sort of prices pushed up for local people.
It's funny you mentioned Spain versus France. We just spent a couple months in France and almost exclusively went to places where there was no English. So I'm bilingual. My kids are learning French. And I really wanted to be in that environment. And it was funny because I'd almost never see anyone that spoke English. It was very much not designed for English travelers. But I also realized I was really off the tourist trail. And when you talk about Spain, I see it here in Western Canada, things become famous on social media and everyone goes to the same places. And this is creating huge winners and lots of losers, not just businesses, but also whole regions. And, what do you see as the impact? Is this still accelerating in terms of sustainability, driving everyone to go to the same place and really stressing out certain places? Or is this going to start to change, do you think?
It's tricky to predict. I would say, social media is having a huge impact on the tourism industry. User-generated content, how people are using social media as their primary source for inspiration, really, and how they decide where they want to go. I guess as soon as you get a trend of everyone wanting to kind of show this particular place or go to this particular place, it gets more people to go there and creates more user-generated content, and it kind of snowballs a bit for particular spots. Will that kind of soften? I mean, maybe, because I don't think people like going to these like horribly condensed, crowded places. I mean, I have been to Barcelona a few times over the last few years, simply because it's often the kind of point that you change for lots of the places you might go to around Spain. And because I take the train a fair bit when I'm traveling. But it's an amazing place. Like, you understand why people go there and why it draws so many people. But with growing crowds, it does lose some of its character. And that's obviously what people want to hold on to. And other places start to get some of the community and authenticity, say, or creativity. When these people get pushed out, you get this natural effect of, people leave and people go somewhere else, and you get an atmosphere created in different places, and it does change and evolve. You don't want to lose that in the places that have it, but there is a bit of a natural process of when people almost kind of ruin somewhere, that people move and things do adapt. I do think that there's a bit of effort going into addressing this issue with policy, say if it's taxes on visitors, simply to control numbers, but also how other destinations are really trying to attract people. So you are getting certain, I'd say, remote areas in Europe that, not only struggle to attract tourists, but have seen a lot of people leaving, particularly young people, say, from the countryside to go and live in cities to find job opportunities, because there's been a real change in kind of more remote areas where there's a bit of a decline, less economic opportunity. And these places seem to be really leaning into attracting remote workers and like digital nomads, and trying to show how they could be a bit of a hub for those kind of people and give lots of nature-based community living opportunities. So there's something interesting happening there as well.
You talked a little bit about some of the challenges with over tourism. And I always feel like there's some aspect with kind of like the unwritten rules of countries that all of a sudden get hit with mass tourism. And you see it in the national parks in North America, where people are going and trying to pet bears or moose or bison. Or I remember, I think a year or two ago, someone died. They jumped into one of the geyser pools in Yellowstone National Park. And then my family, we love going to Japan. And if you go there in kind of peak season, like, you go to Kyoto and you see people doing, photographing geishas, trying to flag them down and kind of breaking all the cultural rules, even something as simple as, eating and walking, something that I didn't know the first time I went. But there's all these things that, we just don't know. And I feel part of the, animosity is all these kind of unwritten rules that are obvious to locals aren't obvious to people that are just booking a 5-day package holiday to Japan. And so as travelers, or maybe you as a traveler, what do you do to make sure you kind of understand some of these unwritten rules and you don't end up, going around just aggravating the locals you're interacting with?
Yeah. It is difficult because I think there are lots of situations where, you're going to another culture, you don't even know that it's something to check sometimes. So there's something in kind of travel where it is about learning and being open to learning and, you know, wanting to experience a culture in a way that is really respectful and is about listening and being open and discovery. And so there's that element. If you're going there trying to be like, I'm gonna inflict my culture on the people there and I'm not interested in that. You're just all inclusive, that you never really engage with the local people. But the more that you create your trip and experience, um, in a way that is really embedding it in the local culture, the more you'd have natural interactions with people from the local area and learn these things. I would say that as a traveller myself, I tend to look up certain things up front. I mean, that's sometimes around, say, going to certain places and checking like what I need to pack. And that can be also around sort of how people dress there, if there's certain modesty things to be aware of. Um, is it a place where people are comfortable when you're just walking around in little shorts or that kind of thing? Or is it more that, there's certain customs and traditions you should respect and be a bit more covered up? I think that's a common one that I would normally check. But some of these things, like you said, in the case of Japan, like there's things that are seen as rude. It's hard to know, you can't know every single custom without sometimes going there and finding out and being open and listening to people.
I think back to traveling when we just had guidebooks. And actually, I'm really nostalgic because I feel like there's so much junk content on the internet now. And there's so much, AI generated. But in the old days, you get your guidebook and you'd start reading it, months before your trip. And like the first pages of like, here's what you need to know. Oh, you're in Nepal. Don't show people the soles of your feet. That's really rude. Oh, you're in Japan. Don't photograph geishas. Don't walk and eat. All these little things that you'd never maybe know that it probably is something that when we go to a new place, just do an AI search. What are the most important tips for not offending locals? That would be a really good tip to do.
Yeah, I have done that. Definitely. I've
I
used
haven't,
AI.
but I should now because it's funny. I often just will ask people, but it'd be an easy thing to, oh, I shouldn't be doing this
Yeah,
here.
for sure. But I do also think, say with how we want to travel and be a good tourist, I think often it comes into how we're having a positive impact on the community. The more we use local tour operators, local businesses, and local accommodations, the more you'll have natural interactions where you do find these things out. But I do think it's good to, it's nice to just know that you know those things.
The whole business model of 10 Adventures is I really believe if you're going to have a trip, you want a local to plan it for you. You want that person who says, oh, the best cheese is from, this one place and you've got to go eat here. And they're kind of sharing all the aspects of why they love the place they live. And so our whole model is every trip's planned by someone that lives in that area who's kind of sharing, the best of the insiders aspect. Because as you say, they tell you all those details that you'd never
Yeah,
know. And they
definitely.
also steer you clear from all these, tourist restaurants that are actually not very good, or the
Or
towns that are
overpriced.
kind of, yeah, yeah. So it's funny you mentioned that. You just got back from a sustainable trip that I was really interested by because I've heard more and more people kind of commit to a sustainable way of traveling. You started in Morocco, you went all throughout Spain to Berlin, and eventually back into your home in the UK. And can you maybe talk about how you personally travel sustainably?
Yeah, absolutely. I suppose the way I came to starting my business was actually a bit as a disgruntled traveller who I'd decided for myself that I wanted to fly less because of the carbon impact of flying. And I was just surprised there wasn't more out there to kind of show me how to do that really easily or make it easy for me. I think I've learned lots of the tricks now, how to do that well. But this particular trip, I had flown to Morocco, but then I was like, can I get home without flying? And it was actually such a brilliant journey because I got a coach, an overnight coach from where I was in the south of Morocco up to the top. And then there was a 1 hour ferry across from Morocco to Spain. And so it's crazy to think that, just 1 hour on a ferry and you've gone from North Africa to Europe. But it's that close. And then I was just taking trains around Europe. I stayed in Spain for a week. Then I got the train up through Spain, through France, over to Berlin for a conference, actually. Visited my sister in Austria quickly, and then trained back to London.
And like, what's the math behind carbon emissions on going by trains and buses and ferries versus a flight?
I suppose there's a few things to take into account. Obviously, this journey, I knew I had to go to Berlin anyway, so I was going there for a trip. So I suppose you could have looked at this, it would have been a few flights. So that's one thing. If you are flying, the best thing that you can do is make sure you're getting a direct flight, because it's often the takeoff and landing that's the bulk of the emissions. Train generally is about 90% lower emissions.
Oh, wow.
Per kind of passenger kilometre. But it depends on the route. Obviously, some routes you can't take the train, for long-haul flights. And it really depends kind of on the particular journey. It can probably be, I'd guess, anywhere between 70 and 90%. There's different trains will be diesel versus some routes are fully electrified. But flying has a particularly negative impact because the emissions are, primarily released at altitude, which kind of increases the negative impact by 3 times or something like that. I think aviation, as a proportion of all of the emissions globally is maybe 3%. So you could say it's not so big, but actually that's significant for like one single mode of transport throughout the world, given like all the other industries going on, everything like that. So it is a big thing to reduce your emissions, to reduce how much you fly. But there's a big distributive sort of effect. The people out there who are taking maybe 1 return flight a year are not the problem. Frequent flyers, people take so many flights. Some people take so many flights a year, and that's what's really driving, I'd say, the problem alongside your private jets and the likes of that. So
I find with train journeys, it's just so much more comfortable. Like you have more space, you have, a nice little, not a nice, just a mediocre place to get food on there. And you go from city center to city center, and it's just so nice. The hard part when we had to go from London to Newcastle, and I kept saying, I want to go on the train. And the cheapest it ever got for the day we want to go, and I looked for like a year, was like £350 one way.
What?
And I was just like, what is going on? That airfare is like 15% the cost. And I can understand people that choose flights because it does seem cheap. But then when you add in all the other costs of having bags and choosing your seats, and then often with the discount flights, it's like, $20 or $30 to each way to get to the airport and get back.
Yeah.
Sometimes it actually ends up being way more expensive. It's just that first sticker price seems lower. But yeah, the UK is so frustrating because there are some great train journeys, but it's just the cost there seems really out of line compared to other parts of the world.
Yeah. And, other European countries have really affordable rail systems, but the UK is particularly bad, unfortunately. But yeah, as you say, I think the time side of it as well,
Yeah.
you have a bit of a false economy there too, because, the journey to the airport, the wait times until your flight all adds up as well. So when you're comparing like, oh, this is a 2-hour flight or I don't know, maybe a 6-hour train, you think, oh, it's so much quicker to fly. But, same way as with the cost, it all adds up.
Well, it's funny because a lot of times people look at sustainability and they think, oh, this is the going to reduce my trip. But I think a lot of times sustainability is what makes the trip, connecting authentically with people in a different culture, eating at a small restaurant where the only person who's not a local, taking the train trip, seeing the countryside versus flying. Are there other ways that you see that focusing on sustainability actually makes your trip better and isn't just, something you've got to do to try and be a better person?
Yeah, definitely. I think, you touched on some great ones there. We were just talking about rail. I think it can be such an incredible experience to do something like a sleeper train, which, it bundles up your hotel for that night with your journey, and you're getting a really unique experience. So, getting like a little cabin on the train, and sometimes they've got the sort of what's it called? Your dining carriage. There's some amazing experiences, and obviously that's for maybe like an international trip, and it's instead of flying. But in itself, it's an amazing thing to do that you might do whether it was sustainable or not. And other things I love is, so many kind of eco lodges or sustainable places to stay are really embedded in nature. And for so many people, I think what we need to be doing when we're going on holiday is really connecting to nature, both, I think, because of how we live our lives and people are getting so burnt out. But it's something we've kind of lost often from our day-to-day lives. And it offers so much in terms of well-being, but also remembering why it's important to do something on sustainability. So really seeing the natural world and the habitats that we care about and want to protect.
It's funny you mentioned that because whenever I go to a travel conference, they always talk about the hottest sector in travel is adventure travel. And
Mm,
people are starting to, people have never done a bike tour are doing, 7 or 14-day bike tours. People are doing walking holidays. They're doing kayaking. Even when you go on cruise ships, if you notice, most of their day activities are actually outdoor and getting you to connect with nature. And at 10 Adventures, I've always felt these are super, super sustainable because you're human powered. You're often using local public transport. You're visiting all these small communities. Often when you're in these small communities, the food even is more local. Like I remember in Italy, they're like, oh yeah, well, this is what we picked out in the fields today. And it's like, oh, that's totally different.
yeah, amazing.
But this is just kind of like a gut feel to me. We've never audited the sustainability of this type of travel, but are we kind of on the right path of, okay, if you have to travel, this is a really sustainable way to travel?
Absolutely. I mean, walking and cycling are essentially zero emission activities if you're looking at it from a climate perspective. So, you couldn't be more sustainable from that point of view. But then, yeah, of course, it comes into how you're engaging with the local area and communities, and lots of that's about the traveler. Like, are they looking after how they're not littering, or whatever it is. There's so many small things that come into it, but yeah, like on principle, those kind of activities are ideal. I think sometimes certain trips, it's what you're doing in destination, and as a tour operator, that's the best thing you can do. Have hiking and cycling trips. It's really difficult to affect who then comes and does your trip. If they've flown from halfway across the road to get to your, halfway across the world to get to your cycling holiday, you can't do anything about that as an operator. But it's great to, I think, see more and more people doing sort of interregional holidays, and where they could, get the train there and then do an activity that's not so far away. And I think that's a really healthy tourism industry, to see people wanting to do things closer to home, and have bigger trips, or like once in a lifetime trips that that they do less frequently.
So if there are listeners who want to incorporate more sustainability and are looking for maybe some of the, the primary things they can do that's not going to change how they travel dramatically, or make it impossible to actually enjoy a trip, what are some things that you'd suggest that are maybe some first steps that are going to have a significant impact on how sustainable their trip is, but not maybe totally change the way they travel?
For me, like, one of the best things to think about is, where am I staying, or where am I spending my money, really? Because you could have two different options. One is a multinational corporation that's taking all of its money out of the local area once you spend it. And one is someone local, hopefully someone that, does care about their impact on the local area, on the community, on the natural habitat. And these things, people who care about this stuff really build it into their brand. So you'll see, if you're staying at an accommodation on their website, that they care about these things. I think being conscious of that, looking out for that, is a good first step. But yeah, spending your money locally and in places that will keep it locally is great for the community, if that's the aspect of sustainability you're prioritizing. On the climate side, there's not much out there at the moment to really carbon label accommodation. It's easier to see how you can reduce your carbon footprint in terms of how you travel. And so, if there are places you can go to or want to go to that are a train journey away, see if you can do that sometimes. It doesn't have to be all the time, but doing one trip like that instead is always positive. So it's small things that you kind of start embedding in how you take your trips.
One thing I like that you discussed was, if you have to travel somewhere and you have to take a plane, then use that time, you have that carbon emission with your flight, spend a few weeks and do your holiday there. So you're not, coming home and then doing another flight, and even doing longer trips with remote work. If you do have an office job, most companies, maybe not in the US, but I know in Canada and Europe, you can usually say, hey, can I work remotely for a couple of weeks? And then you do kind of this hybrid work holiday. So instead of two 1 week holidays, maybe you can make 1 3-week holiday with a bit of work on that. And again, try and, the little thing, just try and reduce the flights. It seems from what you've said is really a big aspect.
Yeah, 100%. And I think, remote working has really opened up the world of sustainable tourism, because it does give people so much more freedom to travel differently and to take the time to really spend in locations. I love these, you're seeing more and more kind of co-living places popping up for digital nomads. And I think, that side of what we're seeing as a trend is really positive.
Rebecca, thanks for coming on the show today and sharing all your expertise on sustainability. It's really been great to have all this knowledge shared.
It's been a real pleasure chatting to you about it. Really enjoyed it.
If people want to learn more, where can they find you?
You can find me on www.sustainabletravel.tech or on LinkedIn. Rebecca Thompson.
Excellent. And everyone, thanks for listening to this episode of the 10 Adventures podcast. We'll be back next week to explore the world and hear about more epic adventures. Bye-bye. Start planning your own adventure by visiting us at 10adventures.com and listen to other episodes of the 10 Adventures podcast on Amazon Music, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or anywhere else you find your podcasts.